Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for making it back here. We'll see if anybody else comes through. It'll be fine too. I'm Chris Miller, and I know most of you already, but I'm an ambassador for the American Museum of Fly Fishing, and I'm doing a short little presentation here today that I'm pretty excited about. I'm a collector as well, and this is a really fun thing that I've done to tie past, present, and future into collecting. So to start off, I do want to plug the museum a second. The 50th anniversary of the American Fly Fisher is here, and this is the predominant vintage fly fishing catalog in the museum's, magazine that comes quarterly as well. It's really fun, and there's some really neat history. This is the one from this last time, and it actually has the Whitlock Vibrant Box article that ties to our new display with the Whitlock display here at the museum. Super exciting. So, hey Kyle, how you doing, man?
What's going on?
So, real quick, I usually go off the seat of my pants on a lot of my presentations, but in this case, I wanted to follow an article that I've written because I'm citing several people that are collectors and people over time that I want to be a little more accurate on. So, excuse me when I jump back and forth from this, I usually don't quite as much. But this is an amazing way for us as collectors to tie not only historical accuracy to our own present, but then also what we can actually do with vintage gear. And my presentation here is actually on Pflueger Medalist and Goodwin Granger, A River Runs Through It outfit. Okay? And the first thing is, as a beginner fly fisherman in the mid-80s, I started about 1985, 86 when I could start driving. And in 1992, Robert Redford put out his film adaptation of Norman Maclean's A River Runs Through It, a short story that we all know and love well now. And as a beginner fly fisherman, all of us of that time wanted to be young Brad Pitt on the river, and what he did at the end on the swim through of catching the fish and everything else, it got us all so worked up and excited. Well, then jump years later, and as a fly fishing collector, one of the things that I was passionate about and I wanted to accomplish for myself was a River Runs Through It outfit. So that way I would have an actual rod and reel that was used in the movie like they did according to the book and what you saw each of them have. My first example of this is, you'll notice this is a picture from the movie, and he's holding a bamboo rod and a reel. And this is one of the things that you start to hunt when you start to find these outfits: which rod, which reel. So, for starters, I was trying to match the best representation that I could find for the years appropriate to the movie, and then match the reel and rod to the same class together. I like to have everything year appropriate as much as possible. So, the gear. The first and predominant thing that you'll notice and recognize in every one of the River Run Through It. Oh, let's see if I can get going here. Sorry. The reel, it has a pressed center cap. You can see the silver ring that's like on a Hardy or anything else. And then when you look closer, you can see the pins for the pawls on back, and several other shots of the movie. You'll realize, and after talking to Gary Borger, who was one of the influencers on the movie with his son Jason, who did the casting, they used a Hardy Perfect and a Pflueger Medalist. They also, in a couple of the shots that are too hard to tell, used a reel that was called the Ocean City Juanita. And I have that reel as well, and it's a neat little reel, but it's the least expensive version of what you can find, and also the least seen in the movie. So, I went to trying to collect perfects and all these different things to hit my genre appropriate, but Hardy Perfects in the 1930 range, when this story was written, as well as the movie Classed, are a much higher and more expensive class of perfects. I have several perfects now, but they were a little harder to find. A little more affordable thing that you can search out is the Goodwin Granger rod and the Pflueger Medalist. So, to start off, I would like to highlight a little history about each of these rods and then bring it back to that movie. So the gear, I went through, the rod was a Goodwin Granger. They used several Goodwin Grangers in the movie. And matter of fact, trying to do the shadow cast, Jason broke several. It would not hold the pressure of the shadow cast that is a faux type of cast that was really just done for the movie and that story. Shadow casting is not really a big thing in fly fishing. Well, from that, to actually accomplish that cast, they used the PAL hexagraph, a graphite rod that looked like bamboo and was built sided and everything. The rest of all the pictures in the movie were done with Goodwin Grangers. Most of these rods, they had a whole group of them that were restored by a certain gentleman, so they were all fishable and castable on the whole 9 yards. Now, as I go, I was trying to match not only the closest, but also we'll notice that I wanted to do this because the museum holds an original early Goodwin Granger on this side, as well as a Pflueger Medalist that you'll see right here behind me that's actually newer than my version that I'll show you guys here in a bit. So we'll start with the rod, the Goodwin Granger. From Michael Sinclair's book, that is a really amazing book that's really hard to get now. It's the Bamboo Rod Restoration Handbook. He says Goodwin Granger rods fall neatly into 3 historic periods and are very easy to date within 5 years or less. The early era is from 1918 through 24. The second middle area is 1924 through 29, and then on to the later era ranging from 1930 through 1945. I'll say this again later, but then in 1946, Wright McGill bought Granger to hold the Granger name and make them under Wright McGill Goodwin Granger that they'll be labeled instead. My search was for a true Goodwin Granger under the Goodwin class that was from the movie, not a Wright McGill version. So, a significant factor in my personal rods designation when I found it is the 1934 change to the all nickel silver uplocking internal screw hardware. This is a very evident sign of Granger patent. The early versions, like the one that the museum has here that's range about 1930, have a slip ring that you can see drawn out by Michael Sinclair in this book, where all later versions have the Goodyear patent one. The Goodyear patent one can also be recognized by different cross-stitch thatching on the texture. There's an early version look and then a later. Also, this rod, as I went through and found it, actually did not have the patent pending numbers on it, or the patented numbers. It usually read patent and a number of the make of the rod, and then the Goodwin Granger. This one actually says patent pending, which means this is a very early ordered rod from 1934, the first year it went to uplocking nickel silver. So, from that then, I figured out that, well, I had found one of the rods. I had found one that's in the 1930s classification, not necessarily an early slip ring, but you'll notice in this, it's got the textured screw-up handle, or the screw-up back on it from one of them, so I wanted to stick with that same guideline. Now, John Garrock, in his book, Fishing Bamboo, this is an amazing book for anyone interested in bamboo. It's not so heavy. It has a lot of great history in it, and plus a lot of fun from his influence of how he loves bamboo. But John Garrock declared in the 1997 book, Fishing Bamboo, he says, meaning no disrespect, that for what a garrison rod would cost, I could buy a stack of good Grangers and fish them for 2 weeks in British Columbia. So not only were they a more affordable rod that was a manufactured rod, not a private make, but they were way more affordable. John Garrock actually declares several times in this book that despite he loves Michael Clark rods and such, that the Goodwin Granger was one of the best values and castability of rods through all of time. So then he goes on to say, Garrock also wrote, Granger rods were originally designed by Goodwin Granger, who began making rods as a hobby about the same time as Jim Payne was taking over his father's rod shop. They were manufactured in Denver by a dozen or so employees of the Goodwin Granger Rod Company, and after 1946 they were made by Wright McGill under the trade name Granger. Most Granger rods were made after Goodwin's death in 1931, and many of the innovations of Granger's were the work of Bill Phillipson, who turned into Phillipson Rod Company. So then the same fishermen who talk about Granger rods, they really mean the company, not the man as a maker. Because most rods under the Goodwin make were later on under the full factory manufacture. Very neat stuff. So then, just real quick as a collector, I found my first Granger on a hunt, which was really kind of rather difficult, in a group of 30 rods that I was making a trade for. When I went to look at this initial batch of rods, I was quickly distracted by Sage and several others to have a heart flutter jump when I pulled this rod from a non-matching cardboard South Bend tube and non-matching sock to see that Goodwin Granger label and really start to freak out a little and have that little heart flutter patter. Tried to stay cool and barter through the trade to get all 30 rods to go home and start the hunt. And one of the neat hunts about this, Goodwin Granger did not put a size on their rods. They did not say this is a 5-weight or an HCH line or D. Also, every rod in the Goodwin Granger line except the very top reserved line was the very same blank. Only embellishment of silk wrap color and extra eyelets changed the rod. You actually got the same hardware and the same blank through all versions of the rod. One of the things that I'd like to also show here, this is a 1934 Granger catalog that matches my 1934 rod, and it explains not only the rod and different things in here and what they did, and they also describe how this new reel seat is not included in the weight of these rods. And when you go down and look at the actual how you ordered the rod, you chose the rod by its length and ounce weight. So I run home, I put the rod together and measure it. I instantly figure out this is a 9-foot rod. Then I take 3 of the sections and I place them on my grain weight scale, and it comes out to 5 ounces. Then if we add, per the catalog, 3/8 of an ounce for the new seat, my rod weighed 5.1 ounces. So that brought it into the range of a 90-50, a Goodwin 90-50. Then they never suggested to you, this is a 5-weight rod. They literally say in the catalog that once you purchase your rod at the weight and length of your preference, you then define the rod to your casting style with different weight of silk line choices. So literally back then they would define this rod even more than they could to your casting style and the silk line that was appropriate for the weight you loaded the rod. So they literally never said they were 5 or 6 weights. You got to define that for yourself. Really neat, interesting stuff. And let's see, I already talked about this rod dated in 1934. One of the things, my rod has been refinished once. This is not the matching appropriate wraps, even though they tried. In Michael Sinclair's book, he literally goes through in this book and tells you the appropriate rod wraps and look of each of the wraps and colors to be able to designate which rod is the champion or which one in the line these are. Since this one's been changed and the maker never said which one it was, I'm going to take it back to original before I fish it and bring it back to what it should look like, a little more according to an actual restoration appropriate for the rod. Also, it's really neat in this Sinclair book that you can see the shape of the Coke bottle handle that is on the Goodwin Granger here in the museum. It was called a Coke bottle handle, you can tell by the shape. Then this was a half wheels reverse on the newer rod version, and Michael did actual perfect hand drawings of each of these so you can find your rod and actually match it to what it is. Very great help from an amazing book. So now let's move on to, that was the Goodwin Granger, found the rod. Now to the reel. And despite I have hundreds of rods, I have even more reels because as a collector, your money will always hold best in reels. Rods break, things happen to rods over time. However, there's a very special collection point to that as well. I started the hunt for the Perfects, the Hardy Perfects, and also the Pfluegers, trying to match overtime appropriate to each. So, my concentration after not finding early Hardys went to shifting to the Pflueger Medalist used that we saw in the picture earlier. So I want to read a couple things first. Despite not showing until the 1929 Pflueger catalog, the reel made its first appearance as a prototype by the Enterprise Manufacturing Company in the 1926 Philadelphia Sesquicentennial Expo. It was our 150th year expo to celebrate our freedom as America. Now, the cool thing about this reel walked away as a prototype with the Medal of Honor of the whole expo. Hence, deeming the name Medalist when it shows up 3 years later in the first 1929 catalog actually for sale. So, excuse me. Also, the Medalist is known over time as your grandpa's reel. Everyone had someone in the family who fly fished who probably had one, as well as it is seriously known as the most fished reel of all time. Even in the span of the years that it's ranged from 1929 through now, there was a whole period of time in the 70s and 80s where every gentleman that came in would send someone and just get a Pflueger Medalist. You just need that Medalist on there, and they would buy these. I literally have some of the later renditions of this reel. This one is a 1972 through 78 in its matching box, and I'll go over it later. This is a DA version that was actually built in Fayetteville, Arkansas. So then, I'm going to go back to and actually the first edition of this reel, and let me move ahead here. This is a early Field and Stream ad, one of the first ads put out by Enterprise for the Pflueger Medalist and Pflueger in Field and Stream in 1929. And one of the neat things about this, you could only order it in the click pawl version, as well as the reel at this time in a 1494, which is my favorite size, was $8. $8 for the new Medalist. Imagine at this time in 1929, it was the start of the Great Depression. And at that time, from 1929 through 34, the average American made $15 a week. The Pflueger Medalist was actually not the affordable reel we see today. This was actually an elevated reel that cost a lot of people half their week's salary. So it was really more of a reel for the upper class or the purist fly fishermen that came from the city a lot of times. So then the first reel had that silver satin nickelum gunmetal finish, the round dimalloy line guard, the fancy sculpted pillars, and if anyone would like to come up and see these later, these are actual sculpted pillars, as well as a bird cage center arbor to dry your silk line, and matching sculpted pillars through the bird cage and the center arbor. They also came up with a new patented press the lever and take apart spool. That was new. No one could remove a spool. You had to unscrew them all before. And that was a very neat patent on that reel. Also, I said earlier, with the line guard, it could be purchased for $8. And then I was showing you this. And then also, this is a 1931 catalog of Pflueger that actually matches. Here is the same reel. This one with the bird cage, you might notice, is actually earlier than the museum's. The museum's has a solid arbor that came about 20 years later. The bird cage hung on for about 10 to 15 years in total. So on the center of the actual sculpted pillars. So now, one of the neat things about Pflueger through the years that I kind of like to go over is there were several changes that happened in its manufacturing. And I'm going to go over 3 major changes that us collectors kind of watch. The first of these examples in the 100 years of manufacturing is the 6 rivet spool. All of the first editions up till about 1950 or 1960s had 6 rivets around the center hub on your spool. Later, after that version, when they changed, you'll notice they all came with 3 rivets. Many of us collectors looking for the earliest, that's what we look for. Very first thing is how many rivets in the spool. The second thing that was a predecessor change to this in 1952 was the change from the gorgeous butterscotch caramel handle that was the swirl plastic to the now ivory plastic handle and ivory plastic hub instead of the center being metal. So as we go, you'll notice through these, if you guys want to come look at them later, despite being a great reel as it progresses and they worry about cost issues, it changes on its dainty, delicate, beautiful work on how it feels to a much, let's say, clunkier, durable, yet it just doesn't have that nice, delicate feel that the early versions had. It also went to a different type of paint coating versus the original leading or satin gun finish that it had on this satin finish, which is really, really pretty. Now, the third change that I'm going to talk about after that was really significant to the Pflueger line was all the way up to, let's see, 1979, and it was the purchase of Enterprise Manufacturing by Shakespeare. Shakespeare then, for 7 years from 1972 through 79, the reels were made in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where all prior reels were made in Akron, Ohio. So this is an actual DA version. It says 1494 DA stamped in here. The DA signifies Fayetteville. So this was still, as bragged on the box, made in the USA big, and it had the made in the USA on the side with no more Akron, Ohio. Earlier reels, including the 6 rivet spools, said made in Akron, O, or made in Akron, Ohio, or all these different things that incorporates right on the hub made in USA directly. Now, after that as well, this happens to be a CJ. So it's a 1492 CJ. This is even later than all of them, despite holding a 6 rivet spool that I found to put in it. It really came with a 3 rivet spool. The CJ signifies Japan made. The AK, when you see it on reels, signifies Hong Kong or China. So those are breaking points in my collecting. I really don't collect many from these eras. I usually try to concentrate on the first 20, 30 years that have the 6 rivet spools, and I watch for the butterscotch handle. Now, one of the other really neat things about this, the Pflueger line now is actually owned by Hardy. There's a couple things that I wanted to also show. This is another birdcage, very early, larger 1496. This reel cost about $12 in the first years. Instantly in this catalog, not only does it show these, but I jump to 1934. The reels drop in price because of the Great Depression. It is the first time ever that a popular reel, as America's weekly salary went from $25 in the 20s to $15 average in the 30s, they actually had to drop the price on the reels. Because of the Great Depression and the wars that started up, there were metal shortages. This happens to be a really rare Pflueger, not because someone polished off all of the satin finishing, but because this is a 13-14-96 stamp. They ran out of bodies and crossover stamped a 13 to a 14 and would use, when they had a shortage, these housings on either reel because the inner guts could be changed out differently. Well, this is one of those really rare crossovers that have the double stamping on it. Very hard to find. I actually ran across this one before I did the other. So that's kind of a neat portion of how Pflueger actually even survived the Depression on what his build was. Now also, one of the other things I wanted to show right here, this is early first patent schematics. These are some of the first earliest patents that they sent in for patenting, even while they were printing them out, patent pending. Like this reel reads patent pending. Later they got marked with the appropriate patent, and this is the schematics on the sheets for those reels. You'll notice this is the start of the drag system that came out about 5 to 10 years later. That's the per click drag that you hear, that's the offset click in so many Pfluegers that are known nowadays that have the actual adjustable drag. Versus the click pawl, that was the original, with just a pawl instead of an adjustable drag system. So then here is also another schematic. At a point about 1939, some of the early Pfluegers, you could remove this metal hub, and it had a spot to fill with lead or BB shot to change the weight of your reel to balance your longer rods. Longer rods were much more popular those days than they are now. So they had to figure out ways to balance tiny reels on long rods the way we don't now. Then let me see before I get to this one. So when I then ran across my Pflueger for my collection, I hunted and hunted, and I finally found one that I thought was good for me that I could afford. They've shot up in price on the early ones. I got this one this year around Christmas from another person. It's got a tiny nick on the foot. I like my reels still fishable in my collection. You'll notice this is plagued by the same nick on a foot. this reel in their collection, even 10 years later, has one of the same little issues from brittle steel. The rest of this reel, though, is gorgeous. This reel, when I found it, I bought it specific because I knew it fell in the first 2-year mark that matches within 3 to 5 years of this same Goodwin Granger rod. So now I found the reel to bring to the appropriate time frame of the Goodwin Granger to actually match into the original movie rod. So I'll come back to that in 1 second. Fishable, as a collector, I'll tell you guys, I paid about $110 for this one. On eBay, they've been ranging between $200 and $300 now. For a true early, and it depends on if they had box and paperwork and all of this, I got this one without the patch or paperwork. Now, collecting can be really fun and affordable. The museum has been a crucial part. Each of my studies in finding these rods and all are online on their actual internet to see the Goodwin Granger Heron study, the reel appropriate, all these things they have, each one that's kept in each location, so you can go back and see these on the museum site as well. The other thing that I wanted to show here, now that I have the matching reel, I haven't finished the rod, but I wanted to show, for starters, a private collector friend of mine, Brian Schaefer. This is in his private collection. This is probably the finest collected piece of a Pflueger Medalist I've seen in my life. This he received in the same purchase, the original matching catalog for the year, 1931. Also, the original matching 1937 dealer catalog with the dealer prices. And I like this because it shows in his catalog at this point it was selling for about $7.50. And then down here on the dealer price they had them for, you could buy them at $3.96, and you were supposed to mark them up to about $6.60 it said. So when they had them at $7, each of the shops were making a little more on those. This is that reel, and kind of the special thing about this is not only is it a very early 1494, that's a matching version to this, butterscotch handle, metal hub, but you'll notice it has its matching red original box. We're talking a 100-year-old box that matches, and its original Tonto pouch. And it was a little moleskin pouch that had these cut edges frayed on a circle that they called the Tonto pouch for some reason. And then here's another picture. It has the original tissue. It has the bird cage, everything. It's probably one of the most pristine reels I've seen for that year in the actual make. The last picture was after I got my reel cleaned up and perfect. I went out a month ago and fished this reel for the first time on a Gordon roller 6'6" quad bamboo rod that was made by Gordon. On this reel and on a soft tackle had a 6-pound rainbow. It was a challenge. I will admit that this fish really did give me a whooping because this reel needed a little more drag system. But it was really neat. I felt like this reel had an amazing mojo to be carried over from 100 years to still be used today. So it is so neat to me to be able to tie the past of the history of this gear to the present of an actual film movie that we have all had close to our hearts, to the future of me getting to fish it. All as a collector in that same thing. So I hope you guys found really a helpful thing with this. If you'd like to come up and look at any of these, please just be careful handling, because I would like to, anybody that would like to see, I have representations of 1930s and 40s. I have the 50s. This reel is the 1953 Pflueger. I have the matching Orvis batten kill impregnated superfine bamboo rod. And that rod, when you ordered it and custom ordered it in 1953, you had 2 reel choices in the Orvis catalog. The Pflueger Medalist, this is the 1953 matcher to that rod, or the J.W. Young Bedeau. The museum actually has a Bedeau in here in this tray as well. So this is a 1950s version. This is a, this one here I really like because this is a original 1963 with, here's the reel, great condition. It has a weird black knob instead of white. We don't know why. And then it has not only extra screws sent by the company, all the original paperwork and original box. the original Pflueger paperwork, as well as the receipts and tags and paperwork from where he bought it at the hardware store. So this is such a neat piece that is so complete. When you go to collecting, the best of your collections are reels that are really high quality, still working and good, with matching box and paperwork, that anything that came with them. And then here is a next size up 1495 spool that hardly ever got used with its matching box from the 60s, where you could buy a spool in this same way. Then this is one of the largest Pfluegers ever made. It's a 1498, if I remember right. Yeah, 1498. You could catch tarpon on these, and people have, and used them in salt water. It had a protector over the actual, and this is a late 60s version. Then we can crawl right into 1972 through 78, an Arkansas built, where they moved from Akron, Ohio to Arkansas. And then finally a small version of a CJ Japanese make. So I hope you all enjoyed this and realized how accessible collecting and how fun it can be for everyone. And I hope some of this helps you find maybe your own Pflueger of the right year, or maybe your grandpa's or whatever else. So thank you all very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So yeah, you bet. If you have any questions, please ask or come look.